from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the following is provided by the West Virginia Department of Education and West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Hey everyone, it's Education Station, the show where we invite teachers from all across West Virginia to submit videos of themselves teaching their favorite lessons. In today's episode, we've got 3 exciting lessons about welding, biology, and manufacturing. Well, hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Alex Milanese, and sparks are literally going to be flying in our first segment. Mr. Conrad has a fun demonstration from the welding classroom. Let's check it out.
Hey everyone, I'm Conrad. I'm a junior at Tyler Consolidated High School and I'm enrolled in the welding program here at Mid-Ohio Valley Technical Institute. I chose welding as my career because a lot of local places like boiler making and fab shops are in need of welders. After high school, I chose to pursue my dream of welding at Hobart Welding School in Troy, Ohio. After that, I plan to stay local around here at a boiler maker or a variety of fab shops. Alright, before we start playing with fire, we need to talk about safety. At the beginning here, you want to have some post-shoot boots. You need to have jeans without any holes in them. If they have holes in them or they have strings, they can catch on fire and burn you. You want to have an FR jacket, fire resistant, FR gloves, and you need to have 4 to 5 shade goggles. Right now I have 5 shade goggles, or you could also use a shield. Alright, start out with your Oxy Acetylene safety. On your bottles, you have regulators right here, and before you start, you should check for leaks. You should spray around here, and if you see bubbling up around here, you know it's not on correctly, and you either need to get a new one or unscrew it and put it back on correctly. Same with your acetylene. On your oxygen tank, when it's full, it should hold on 2,200 psi. And on your smaller bottle, which is your acetylene, it should hold around 250 psi. See, starting on your oxygen bottle, to turn it on, make sure your regulator screws are loose. And now turn your bottle slowly until you see the gauge come up, and turn it all the way on. And now to set it up, make sure you're standing to the side and turn it on. Screw your regulator screws slowly. We're running around 40 psi. Alright, now in your acetylene bottle, if you're storing it laying down, you need to set it up at least a half hour before you use it because there's acetate in the bottle and you need to let it settle down to the bottom. It absorbs your acetylene and it pours it out as you're using it. Now to turn your acetylene bottle on, make sure your regulator screw's loose. Slowly turn it on until you start getting pressure. Now on this one, you only do a half to 3/4 of a turn. Now on this, you want to run about 3 to 5. Today I'm around 5 since I'm cutting a little thicker metal. Now on your acetylene, for working conditions, you don't want to go past 10. Very dangerous, it could blow up. Alright, now onto your torch. You have your green line, which is your oxygen, and then you have your red line, which is your acetylene or your fuel. They will never be the chains, this is what they'll be. Alright, you got your torch body, and then you got your torch head. You have your cutting lever, and your preheat valve. Alright guys, talk about the cutting goggles. It's very important to wear them while you're cutting. Unlike welding, it don't burn your eyes, but the damage can be permanent from as it does it slowly. So make sure you're always wearing 4 to 5 shades while you're doing your Oxy Acetylene cutting. Alright guys, now we'll start to play with fire. Alright, before you start your torch and you learn some safety, you should all use a friction lighter. If you use like a match or a lighter, it could be dangerous because you're holding it up there and still a live flame. Alright, start off, make sure your oxygen valve is closed, your preheat valve's closed. Now turn your oxygen on all the way. Then crack your acetylene. Now what we want is a neutral flame, which is a good mixture of oxygen and acetylene together. So what you do is you gotta make sure your acetylene's cracked a little bit, and then you just light it. And you wanna mix that smoke away. Then you slowly turn on your preheat valve. And now, see right here how the flames aren't jumping as much, which means a good, nice, neutral flame. And now getting to cutting, you want to make sure you're always comfortable. You want to get a good spot where you can lay your arm down, get ready. So you want to put your goggles on. What you want to do is, you want to go on your metal, make sure you get the metal nice and orange, you get it preheated, make sure the metal is nice and orange, then step back and then cut nice, slow, and steady. Alright, now you're done cutting, turn off your acetylene, your fuel. That'll stop the flame. Now what you want to do is shut your gas off here, your oxygen off. And now you just cut a piece of metal off. Now you can take your goggles off now. Come over here. You want to turn your oxygen tank off. And your acetylene tank off. Now you're going to bleed the lines, get all the build up pressure out. So first off, what I like to do is turn off bleed my acetylene first. So crack your acetylene until your pressure's down to 0 here, then turn it off. Now turn on your oxygen a little bit and press your cutting handle until your pressure right here goes up. Like that. Now make sure both your valves are shut off here. Set your torch down. Then you want to unscrew your regulator screws until they're loose. And that's how you safely use the Oxy Acetylene cutting torch.
Hey guys, my name is Mike Sims. I'm the welding instructor at the Mid-Ohio Valley Technical Institute, and I'd like to take just a little bit of time to talk to you about welding. Welding is a skill that only about 2% of the people in the United States ever develop. If you want to think about it, there's actually more heart surgeons in the United States than there are certified pipeline welders. Welding affects all of our lives every day. We may not think about it, but there's welds in the cars we drive, from the bridges we drive across, to the buildings we're in. Heck, our school buildings and everything even have welds in them. Every morning when we get up and we go to our refrigerator, there are 43 welds in that refrigerator that you get your juice from. Welding is also a great career choice, especially if you're a person that likes to travel. There are jobs all over the United States for certified welders, and a lot of young people like to get into these fields, travel, see the world, plus also a good salary. If welding sounds like something that you would like to do, then check out your local career center or come join us here at the Mid-Ohio Valley Technical Institute and become part of the Moths family.
Thanks, Mr. Conrad. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at a specific type of science called biology. Miss Sinisi has a fun lesson about the basics of evolution. Let's check it out.
Today I have two separate videos for you, and we're going to conclude our Biology 101 series with evolution. This is lesson number 10. And so I put Charles Darwin on here because he is the father of evolution, and he did most of his work in the 1800s, so we put the 1859 up there. What he referred to evolution as was evolution by means of natural selection. So we're going to look at both of those processes, and that's how organisms change over time, and they change changes in their heritable physical or behavioral traits. So most of these would be traits that would be inherited. So let's look. Darwin was influenced by observations he made during his trip to the Galapagos Islands aboard the HMS Beagle. That was the name of the ship. HMS stands for Her Majesty's Service, in case you don't know. But what he did was he was a naturalist. He got seasick while he was on the ship. So he would get off of the ship and walk around the islands and keep notebooks where he drew pictures of different animals and he took notes about what he saw. So what he observed was a whole array of unique finches, and finches are birds, right? And they exhibit slight differences from island to island, and the differences he noticed most were beak shape. Depending on what they ate, if they ate seeds, they had one beak shape. If they ate nuts, they had another beak shape. If they ate worms, they had a different beak shape. So he was trying to figure out why they all had different beak shapes according to what they ate. So patterns in the distribution and similarity of organisms had a very powerful influence on Darwin's thinking. He also looked at tortoises and some other animals, lizards, giant lizards, and things that were on the Galapagos. But mostly when people talk about Darwin, it's the finches. So here's his theory. There are three different postulates. First, species, and I put the definition of a species here. Those are populations of interbreeding organisms. It can only be a species if they breed and produce viable young that can then in turn reproduce. So, and how those change over time and space. So the representatives of the species that live today are different than those that lived in the recent past, and those populations in different regions differ slightly in form or behavior. So when he thought of evolution, he thought over a long period of time, how are the species changing? And what do those changes mean? So number two is all organisms share a common ancestor with other organisms. And so he thought, this is what Darwin thought, over time populations may divide into different species, which share a common ancestral population. So those ancestors, that would explain the similarities of organisms that are classified together. When we mean classification, we're all human beings. We're all Homo sapiens. We're classified together. A dog is a canine, a cat is a feline. They belong, even though they're both vertebrates and animals, as we go down the taxonomy, we see that the farther you go down, the more closely related you are. We can belong to the same genus and a different species and exhibit different characteristics. And their similarities reflect the inheritance of the traits from a common ancestor. So what he's saying is you would not inherit these traits unless they were beneficial to you, and we'll look at that in the video on natural selection. Evolutionary change is gradual and slow. It doesn't happen overnight. So he thought that claim was supported by long episodes of very gradual change in organisms in the fossil record, and then the fact that no naturalist had observed the sudden appearance of a new species in Darwin's time. Not a new species just didn't pop up. So that was what he credited that to. The process of natural selection, according to Darwin, has 4 components. We're going to look at all 4 of them. The first one is variation, right? Organisms within populations have individual variation in appearance and behavior. So I put some examples down here. You see a dog, but not all dogs look the same. A collie looks different than a beagle, looks different than a cocker spaniel, right? Those are all dogs, those are all canines, but they're different species within the same population. So they can vary in body size, hair color, facial markings, how their voices sound, or number of offspring they produce. So that was the first thing, was variation. The second thing is inheritance. Some traits are consistently passed from parent to offspring, right? Those are called heritable, things that you inherit from your parents. Whereas other traits are strongly influenced by environmental conditions and show weak heritability, right? So this just depends on which of these characteristics or traits, genes, are more beneficial. Those are the ones that we're going to see. If they are only influenced by the environment, we may not see the heritability that we see in the ones that are not consistently. So, number 3, they have a higher rate of population growth. Most populations have offsprings each year that the resources can support, right? So that's one of the things that you learn, supply and demand. So we only have enough offspring that we have resources to feed them. If we have more, they're not going to survive, right? So leading to a struggle for resources. Each generation experiences substantial mortality, right? They die if there's no resources, right? So that's if you don't have anything to eat, then your species will die off, or the people will die off, or some of the animals will die off. Differential survival and reproductive rates. Individuals possessing traits well suited for the struggle for local resources will contribute more offspring to the next generation because they survive. Those attributes are then in turn passed on, and we'll look at that more when we look at natural selection. That would be like if you were out hunting and the guy that had the bow and arrow caught more than you did with your hands, right? Those are resources that we're talking about here. So natural selection, we have one generation to the next. That struggle for those resources will favor individuals with the variations that we talked about, over others, and then change the frequency of the traits within a population. If you have traits that are more beneficial, those are going to continue on, and they're going to occur more often because they're beneficial for the environmental conditions in which you live. They won't, that's the reason, that's what drives. The environment drives natural selection, and we'll look at that in the other video as well. They confer an advantage to those individuals who leave more offspring. That's called an adaptation. If you have a trait that is advantageous, then you adapt that to your environment. Those are called adaptations. That would be like Darwin and the beaks. You would have to possess the beak for what you're eating on that island. You can't have a beak for eating worms and eat seeds. You would starve to death. So you have to have the beak to eat seeds. Therefore, that's produced on. That's on in your offspring, right? You're no longer, and that's why on different islands they had different beak types because of different food sources. In order for natural selection to operate on a trait, the trait must possess heritable variation. Variation you can inherit, and it must confer an advantage to the competition for resources, or we don't need it. I used to tell all of my students when I taught biology is about two things, sex and food. Those are the two things, reproduction and what you eat. Those are the two things biology revolves around, because if you don't have either, your species ceases to exist. So evidence of natural selection, this is an example that people commonly use. It's called industrial melanism. Melanin is the pigment in your skin, or the pigment in a dog's fur or a cat's fur, or in this instance we're looking at moths, but melanin is pigment. They were peppered moths, and I gave you the genus and the species name. Anytime you see a genus name, you capitalize it. Species is lowercase, it's italicized or underlined. So they were called Beeston butillaria. Those are the peppered moths. So before 1800, the typical moth of this species looked light, like a really light gray to a white color, right? And very few of the dark colored melanic moths occurred. Those were very rare. Mostly you had the white moths, right? So if you're thinking about competition and predator-prey relationships, the white moths landed on the trees that had the most lichens. So lichens are, if you go and you're walking in the forest and you see that kind of stuff that looks like it's painted on the tree, it's green. A lichen is both a fungus and an alga. It photosynthesizes, but it also decomposes. But if you see more of those, that means that there is a lot of nutrients in the soil, a lot of oxygen. They call them lichen forests, and that's a good place to be. So these moths occurred on these trees to avoid predation. The birds couldn't see them to come pick them off, right? But during the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot of soot produced and other industrial waste that accumulated on the tree trunks, and it darkened the color of the tree trunks right here. So those light-colored moths became more rare, because now if you're a light-colored moth against a dark tree trunk, the bird can see you, pick you off, and eat you. So they changed. And so the dark ones became more abundant because now they blend in more to the tree trunks than the light moths do. So by 1819, the first melanic morph was seen, and by 1886, it was far more common, illustrating rapid evolutionary change. The moths had to change rapidly to avoid being preyed upon. So eventually the light morphs were common only in a few locales, and those were far distances away from the industrial cities, right? The cause of this change was thought to be selective predation, right? We're picking the ones that we can see, the ones that the birds could see, and that favored the camouflage coloration of the moth. So this is the environment driving natural selection, or the heritable characteristics to continue on, which was one of Darwin's postulates.
Thanks, Ms. Sinisi. All right, so growing up, I'm sure we all enjoyed playing with blocks. But did you know that building with blocks is actually a form of manufacturing? Well, for a more in-depth look at different types of manufacturing, let's go visit Mr. Sands.
Hey guys, this is Mr. Sands from United Technical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Today I would like to talk to you about two manufacturing processes. First process would be additive manufacturing, more commonly known as 3D printing. A lot of you have maybe have 3D printers in your classrooms, at your schools, and maybe had the opportunity to use those 3D printers. That again is called additive manufacturing. The other manufacturing process that we want to look at today is the process known as subtractive manufacturing. This is done through removing material. So you start off with a solid block or a solid piece of material, and you remove material until you become to the desired shape. So we want to look at the entire process. The process beginning in engineering, where the engineers would create a 3D model of the part, then would create a part drawing. From that part drawing, the machinists would have all the information necessary to manufacture the desired part. So we want to take a look today just at what the whole process looks like. So let's get started. So let's take a closer look at what additive manufacturing means and what subtractive manufacturing means. Additive manufacturing is the industrial production name for 3D printing. Many of you have seen 3D printers around your schools and maybe have had the opportunity to use it. So this is called additive manufacturing. So it is a computer-controlled process that creates a three-dimensional object by depositing material layer upon layer. So stacking material up to create your three-dimensional object. So subtractive manufacturing is just the opposite. It's where we start with a solid block of material and we remove material or we cut material away to manufacture the part. So let's look and see how the process works. So to begin the process of developing the part, we first have to create a 3D model. The 3D model of this product or this part we're going to make is done in engineering, and in engineering they will create for you a 3D model, placing this part in 3D space where I can look at it from all angles and work with it from all angles to create the part that I'm going to be working with. So from that, we are going to have what we refer to as a drawing or a part drawing. So from the 3D model, I'm going to create a part drawing. And on this part drawing, it will give me all of the dimensions of the part that I'm going to make. So I take all of this information and I either load it into the 3D printer or I take it into the process of machining. So the first one I want to look at is the process of machining or subtractive manufacturing. So in subtractive manufacturing, we would start off with a solid block of material. And from that, we would begin to cut away or remove material to make the part that we're trying to make. So the machine begins to cut, and at each cut it removes a little bit of material all the way down until we get the part that we're trying to make. This again would be subtractive manufacturing. So today I would like to do an exercise with you using Lego blocks. So I went around my house today and I found some Lego blocks. So to do the additive manufacturing, you will need 3 of the rectangular Lego blocks, and you will need 4 square Lego blocks. So to show you the additive manufacturing, remember additive manufacturing is the layering of materials. So in additive manufacturing, each level of Legos would represent a level of the part that we're wanting to make. So as we stack the Legos, the part that we're looking for and the part that we created in engineering begins to develop with each layer. As we stack each layer of Legos, then the part that we designed in engineering begins to show. So again, this is how additive manufacturing works. It's the stacking of parts one on top of the other. So you can take a few minutes and you could try this for yourself at home. So now let's look at subtractive manufacturing. For this exercise, you will need 3 of the rectangular Legos and 10 of the square Legos. So what happens in this process is we begin to take material away to get the desired shape. We refer to that as machining. So we begin to each layer remove some of the material, and as we remove the material, the part that was designed in engineering begins to take shape. So through this we have subtractive manufacturing, and now we have the part that was designed in engineering. So the red part is going to represent subtractive manufacturing, and the blue part will represent additive manufacturing. As you can see, both parts look the same. They just use a different process to get to the same desired result. So no matter whether you're using additive manufacturing or subtractive manufacturing, you can produce the part as desired and as designed through engineering. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's look at additive manufacturing versus subtractive manufacturing. So today, as you look around your house, see if you can find some objects that you can stack one on top of the other to produce a different shape. This again would be a good exercise for additive manufacturing. And then ask an adult if you could use a pair of scissors, a piece of paper, and draw a shape on that piece of paper and then cut that shape out. Using the scissors to cut out the shape would be another example of subtractive manufacturing. So as you go through today, just look for opportunities where you can apply these principles. Again, I'm Mr. Sands from the United Technical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia, and thanks for spending a little time with me today. Have a great day.
Thanks, Mr. Sands. All right, well, that wraps up everything for us here today on Education Station. We want to thank everyone who shared their awesome lessons, and we want to thank you for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Education Station.